Mortismedia. Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of night shift stories for you to dive into. Don't forget that if you have your birthday coming up, you can get your birthday shout out by heading over to Patreon. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened about 8 years ago, when I was fresh out of college and working a string of cleaning and maintenance jobs to make rent. One of those jobs was a small but beautiful church in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, St. Paul's Catholic Church on Park Street. It's an old place that was built sometime around the early 1900s. It's so pretty it looks like it belongs on a postcard. During the day it's peaceful. People would come in to pray, tourists would wander through quietly, and the air always smelled faintly of church, like incense and old wood. That night though, when the doors were locked and the lights dimmed, the building felt completely different. I worked the evening's cleaning shift 3 times a week, but occasionally when someone called out sick, or there was an event the next morning, I'd cover the overnight shift from 10 PM to 6 AM. The night shifts paid a little extra, but they were honestly unnerving. The building is huge, with an upper loft, a basement and a narrow attic above the choir balcony that you can only reach by a metal spiral staircase tucked behind a door near the organ. That attic was where they stored old furniture, extra pew cushions, broken decorations, and a piano that I was told didn't work anymore. The caretaker at the time, an older man called Ray, mentioned that the piano was too out of tune to use, and moving it downstairs had been too much trouble, so it just sat up there collecting dust. One Friday night I was alone doing my rounds. It was around midnight. I remember that clearly because I had just finished mopping the side chapel and was taking a break in one of the pews, scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore how empty the place sounded. You could hear the building settle, the occasional pop or groan of old wood, and the faint hum of lights in the hall. And honestly, I'd gotten used to that. But what I wasn't used to was the sound of music. At first I thought I was hearing things. It started off very quietly, like someone plunking random keys one at a time. Just a few notes. Then it picked up, rhythmically, like someone trying to play a half-remembered song. I realized the sound was coming from above me, from the direction of the attic. I actually laughed at first, thinking it must be Ray or one of the parish volunteers messing with me. Maybe they'd snuck in to mess around. It was late, sure, but strange things had happened before. So I called out, "Hey Ray, is that you?" But there was no answer, and the music stopped immediately, like whoever was playing had lifted their hands from the keys and was waiting to see what I would do. I stood there for a moment, heart thudding, and I told myself to stop being stupid. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase up to the chair loft, then opened the heavy wooden door that led to the attic stairs. The air up there was colder, stale, and filled with the smell of dust and old wood polish. I reached the attic landing, shining the light around. The beam caught a bunch of covered furniture, boxes, some old hymnals stacked in the corner, and the piano, sitting against the far wall near the only window. The white keys were yellowed with age, and half of them looked chipped. But there wasn't anyone there. I stood there for a minute listening. The building was completely silent again except for the faint hum of the heating system from below. I walked over to the piano, half expecting someone to jump out and yell boo. But there was nothing, except the soft creak of the floorboards under my boots. I touched one of the keys. It made a dull, dead sound. The strings must have been quite frayed. And that's when something slammed. It wasn't just a small noise, it was a loud, sharp noise that came from behind the metal doors built into the wall, a storage closet for old decorations and choir stands. I dropped the flashlight and nearly defecated myself. and it hit the ground so hard it rolled a few feet before stopping, with the beam pointing at the door. Everything inside me screamed not to open the door, but I stood there petrified for a good 30 seconds waiting for another sound, but nothing came. I backed away slowly, picked up my flashlight and made my way downstairs. I didn't even bother to turn the attic light off. I just went straight to the office, grabbed my jacket and clocked out early. The next morning I told the morning crew I wasn't doing nights anymore. They laughed at me at first, until I told them what happened. And that's when one of the other night cleaners, someone called Marisol, who'd been working there for years, told me in confidence, "You're not crazy. Weird stuff happens there at night. I've heard things too." She told me she once heard someone whisper her name while she was vacuuming the basement. Another time, she saw the same attic light flicker on when no one was up there. And she even said she heard the organ play a single note, all by itself. I asked Ray about it later, trying to get a more grounded explanation, and he just shrugged it off. "Place is old. Sound carries in weird ways. Probably just an echo of the heating pipes." That's the logical explanation, I know, but I can't explain how the piano, one that doesn't even work, managed to play coherent notes that night, or how the door slammed when I was the only one in the building. For a long time I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some prankster broke in, left through one of the side exits. Maybe the old pipes made a noise that just so happened to sound like piano keys. Except the attic window was shut tight when I went up there. The door handle wasn't loose either, and if someone had been up there I would have heard them on the stairs as they creaked like hell. After that night I switched to day shifts permanently. I still cleaned that church for a few months, but never once dared go back up to the attic. Even walking past there gave me chills, and every time I'd hear the faint echo of the organ or the piano during mass, I'd think about that night, standing in the dusty attic, flashlight trembling in my hand. I haven't worked there for many years now. Sometimes I'll walk past it though, and it'll bring back the memory of that night. But honestly, it's one I like to repress. I've worked as a coroner for over 15 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things. Some I could explain, and some I learned to stop thinking about too hard. This story happened about 6 years ago, somewhere outside Springfield, Missouri, in the middle of nowhere, one of those empty stretches of gravel road that branches off from Route 60. It was past 2 a.m. The call came in as a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and by the time I arrived, the local sheriff's deputies were already there, their cruisers parked at awkward angles, headlights watching pale light over the side of an old semi-trailer lot. Rain was coming down steadily as a fine mist. The scene itself was subdued. A handful of cops, standing under a small tin roof canopy at the far edge of the lot, next to a tarp covering a body bag. I parked my van nearby, grabbed my gear and joined them under the little awning. We were all shoulder to shoulder trying to stay dry while we waited for the funeral home to send a driver for transport. The rain on the tin roof made conversation weirdly intimate, loud enough to cover any awkward silence, but not enough to drown it out entirely. So we were just having small talk when we all heard it. Footsteps, crunching on gravel, coming from behind the line of trailers maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I looked up immediately expecting to see headlights or a flashlight beam, something that meant the funeral home had arrived. But I couldn't see anything. It was just the darkness and the rain. "Anyone else here?" I inquired. The deputy nearest me shook his head. Another one leaned out from under his canopy to look around. Probably runoff from hitting the roof and gravel," he said. That made sense, so I nodded and tried to focus on the conversation again. A few minutes passed and we were back to chatting. The rain pattered hard on the tin above us, and then I heard it again, but closer this time. Distinct, heavy, approaching crunches. I turned my flashlight towards the direction of the noise, scanning the rows of trailers. But there was nothing. The light just dissolved into the mist and dark. The other guys noticed I'd stopped talking. "You good?" one of them asked. Yeah, I thought I heard something again." No one else reacted, and for a moment I convinced myself that maybe I had really imagined it. I've been doing this job long enough to know that exhaustion and adrenaline can play tricks on your senses, and it didn't help that it was raining either. But then it happened the third time. This time the steps started further out, like someone had dropped from the bed of one of the trailers and came towards us. I spun around fast, sweeping my flashlight across the gravel, but there was no one there. The deputy saw me looking again and said, "Hey, you good, Doc? You're jumpy tonight." I nodded, embarrassed. Said, "I just need coffee." Inside though, I was unnerved. I wasn't new to this kind of work. I'd done this kind of stuff for a long time. A couple more minutes passed and we heard the distant rumble of a truck engine somewhere on the highway, probably the funeral home on his way. And that's when I heard the footsteps one final time, and it wasn't just me, we all heard it. Everyone looked around with their flashlights, but none of us could see anything. Nothing. All the deputies had gone quiet as well. "The hell was that?" one of them muttered. We all stood there for a solid minute, scanning, squinting into the darkness. The rain had started to let up, and without it making another noise, the silence felt huge. No one said anything. We just waited to see the mystery stranger emerge from the darkness. But we never saw anyone. The funeral people arrived, and we loaded the body quietly, signed the paperwork, and all went our separate ways. And on my drive back I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to logic my way out of what I'd experienced, what everyone had experienced. How had we all heard it from multiple directions, but seen nothing? It didn't sound like an animal. Animals don't wear boots. I've been back to that area a few times for non-work related stuff, but I've never heard anything like it since. Could it have been the ghost of the man who we were called to get? I don't know the answer to that, and I honestly try not to think about it. This happened to me around the turn of the millennium in northern Canada. Back then, there weren't cell phones in every pocket, and no easy way for people to call unless you find a payphone or a lucky passing driver. I was in my late 20s, working night shifts at a factory on the outskirts of town. It was winter, which meant it was already pitch black by 6:30 p.m. I didn't have a car at the time, so I walked to work every evening, which was a solid 45-minute trek through the industrial district. I actually liked it most nights. The crunch of my boots on packed snow, the quiet, and the pale glow of the streetlights turning everything that orange color. It felt peaceful in a lonely way. The roads in that part of town had no sidewalks, just wide lanes for trucks. The snow there never stayed soft for long. The big rigs that rolled through every day and night packed it down until it turned into rippled sheets of ice. I'm tall, and I've always walked fast, so my strides were quite long. The air was about -20 degrees Celsius, and the cold burned through my jacket. But I was almost at work, maybe 2 blocks away when the following happened. I don't remember slipping exactly, just the sudden absence of control. 1 second I was upright, and the next I was weightless, my feet gone out from under me, body flipping backward through the air, then impact. It felt like my spine had been slammed into the earth by a sledgehammer. The world went black around the edges, and I couldn't breathe for a second, just this horrible whoosh sound as all the air left my lungs. When I tried to move, nothing happened. At first I thought maybe I was just stunned, and then I tried again. My arms, my legs, nothing. I was flat on my back, the cold seeping through my coat, the rough, icy ripples pressing into my shoulder blades. There was no sound except for the faint hum of a distant factory and the occasional groan from the wind. I lay there, staring up at the yellow haze of sky, realizing just how alone and vulnerable I was. It's strange how quickly fear sharpens into clarity. I knew immediately that if I stayed there long enough I could die. Not dramatically, just either quietly frozen to death, or perhaps crushed by one of the many trucks that passed. Now that stretch of road wasn't busy, but every so often an 18-wheeler would roar through, heading between towns. The ice reflected like glass, and a driver wouldn't be expecting a person lying flat on the road. If one came around the corner, they wouldn't see me until it was too late. The image formed in my head so vividly, it made my pulse jump. Headlights cutting through the fog, the low thunder of an engine, tires sliding, and then nothing. That was the moment I began fighting. Adrenaline is a strange thing. My body was still frozen in place, but some part of me refused to accept that this was how I was going to die, especially so young. I forced my muscles to move, to do something. I managed to twitch, just enough to shift the fabric of my sleeve. Then I managed to roll one shoulder. The pain that shot down my back made me see stars, but it didn't matter. I used it like a spark. I threw everything I had into one violent jerk, trying to twist my torso. My legs followed clumsily and numbly. It wasn't graceful. I probably looked like a fish flopping on a dock. But it worked. I managed to roll onto my side. The cold bit into my cheek. I took a few breaths, then tried again, and then again. And I got myself off the road, sliding awkwardly towards the gutter. It probably took 5 to 10 minutes to move the distance that should have taken me 5 seconds. Each effort drained me, leaving me panting in the frigid air, trembling from both exertion and shock. When I finally reached the edge of the road, I lay there, staring at the shadow of a fence that ran along the lot beside me. That's when the fear faded, and numbness settled in. I lay there for what felt like forever, until I could feel my fingers again, until I could test my legs and find they still worked. Eventually, I pushed myself upright. My back screamed with every motion, but standing had never felt so good. I limped the rest of the way back to the factory, one slow step after another. When I got inside, I didn't even tell anyone what had happened. I just clocked in, found a quiet corner, and sat there for the longest time, letting the heat soak back into me. The next morning, I noticed a huge bruise spread across my back, deep purple and almost black in spots, but no real damage, no broken bones, no paralysis, thankfully. Just soreness, and a reminder of just how breakable we humans are. Sometimes I think about it. I realize how absurdly close I was. If I'd have hit my head just a little harder, I might have been knocked out. If a truck had come by 10 minutes earlier, that would have been it. There'd be no story to tell, just a exploded body on the road. I still walked to work after that, albeit a little slower and more cautiously, and never lost the appreciation for how dangerous walking on ice can be. I work at a water treatment plant in Texas, smack bang in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by flat land and scrub. The plant sits right off the highway, surrounded by a tall 8-foot fence topped with barbed wire. Inside, it's just me and the humming machines. My job is pretty simple. Monitor the tanks, check chemical levels and make adjustments, make sure nothing overheats or explodes. I've been doing it for years now, and I actually like the quiet. Most nights, it's peaceful. You get the low, rhythmic whine of the pumps, which you get used to after a while. And when it gets to around 2 a.m., it gets so quiet, you can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing over your head. It's easy to forget how isolated you are, until you stop and think about it at least. So this happened about 4 years ago. I was halfway through my shift, must have been around 2:45, and I was sitting at my little desk in the control room, killing time and playing on my Nintendo DS. I'd just done my hourly walkthrough, checked the gauges and everything was stable. I remember thinking how quiet it was that night, even for out there. There was no wind or highway noise, just the usual hum of the system and the occasional creak of metal. And that's when I heard something. "Get on the ground." It was loud and sharp from right behind me. For a moment my brain couldn't process it. It was too sudden, too far out of context. And then I heard the movement of boots scraping on concrete and I froze. The tone in that voice told me it wasn't a prank, nor a misunderstanding. I turned my head just enough to see the barrel of a handgun pointing at me. I don't know guns well, but that didn't matter. When you're staring down one, all you see is the black hole at the end. My body went cold. My ears started ringing and my vision tunneled. "Get on the ground," he barked. I didn't argue. I dropped instantly, hands out in front of me, my knees hitting the concrete hard, but I barely felt it from the fear. My only thought was, "Don't die here, don't die here, don't die here." The man moved closer. I could hear him breathing ragged and fast, like someone who'd been running. His boots were muddy, and his clothes looked filthy, like he'd been sleeping outdoors for a while. "Don't move," he said, his voice trembling now. "I'm sorry, man, I don't want to hurt you. I need your truck." He was apologizing while holding me at gunpoint. This made it even worse somehow. I could tell he was desperate, and desperation is dangerous. He ordered me to turn around, zip-tied my wrist first, and wrapped duct tape around my arms and chest. My heart was slamming so hard I thought he could hear it. The tape pulled tight enough to sting my skin, and every rip of it echoed in that concrete room. "Where are the keys?" I told him they were on the desk. He picked them up, then emptied my wallet, my phone, my pocket knife, everything into his own. The whole time he kept talking like he was trying to convince himself that he wasn't the bad guy. "I didn't want to do this. I didn't mean for this to happen like this. I just need to get out of here." The words made no sense to me, but the way he said them frightened me even more than if he'd been screaming. He was shaking. His hands weren't steady on the gun. I remember the smell of him. Sweat, dirt, and something chemically like gasoline. His face was pale under the grime and his eyes darted around constantly. He looked like someone on the edge of collapse. He told me to stay down and not to move for 20 minutes, and that if I tried following him, he would return. Then he was gone. I heard the door slam, his boots pounding the walkway outside, then the unmistakable sound of my truck turning on. And then it was gone. For a long time I didn't move. I was too afraid he might be testing me, might still be nearby, jump back out and shoot me for breaking the terms of my imprisonment. My arms, though, were starting to go numb from the duct tape. The sound of the idling truck faded into the distance, swallowed by the emptiness outside. After maybe half an hour, I started to free myself. The duct tape had some give near my elbows, and I managed to twist and scrape until my wrist slipped out. My hands were covered in sweat, which helped. I got the tape off my arms next, and stumbled outside, half expecting to see him lurking somewhere in the dark. There was nothing but the steady, red glow of the plant's lights reflecting off the tanks. The highway beyond the fence looked deserted. I went back inside, locked the door, and called the police. By the time they arrived, it was almost dawn. They took my statement, dusted for prints, and told me something that made me sick to my stomach. The man who robbed me had escaped custody from a prison transport nearby. He'd been missing for almost a full day. Apparently he'd been walking along the highway and spotted my truck inside the fence. He must have climbed over the barbed wire just to get to it. They caught him later that afternoon, still driving my truck. He tried to fill it with one of my credit cards. He confessed everything, even apologized to the cop for what he did. He said he didn't want to hurt the guy in the plant, he just needed a way out. I didn't go back to work for 2 weeks after that, and when I finally did, every sound in the place made me jump. A door creak, the hiss of the air compressor, even the hum of the pumps. I couldn't tell what was ordinary anymore. For months I'd jolt awake thinking someone was standing behind me shouting again. Even now, years later, when I'm doing the night shift, there are moments I have to stop what I'm doing just to listen. I'll be standing in the control room staring at the reflection of the door in the window glass, waiting for something to move. It's hard to explain unless you've been there. How fragile everything feels when you realize how fast and easily it can be taken away. I don't blame the guy, not entirely. He was desperate, lost, and probably out of his mind from exhaustion. But it doesn't change the fact that for those few minutes, I truly believed that I was going to die alone on that concrete floor. And I didn't even get to finish my game of Pokemon. When it's my turn with the new hires, I always tell them my story, to make sure they lock the doors, and to be wary of people who might sneak in. It's obviously a very low chance, but better safe than dead. I've had my fair share of weird and unexplainable experiences since I was a kid. There's the usual stuff, mostly hearing voices calling your name, or having a dream that within a few days came true, or thinking of someone or something for the first time in a long while, and then suddenly they or it either comes up as a topic or shows up in life. All things I can write off as my imagination overthinking things. But there's one experience that haunts me to this day, and it's when I worked as a security guard at an old school ground in New England. This was around the start of COVID's quarantine, so no one knew what to do entirely. It must have been around mid-March or April. The weather was warm and quarantine was only just being enforced, and since the school was a dorm-based campus, that meant all the students had to leave. I've been working there since December, so I was used to how lively this school was, and seeing it so empty just made me feel uneasy. What once was a school with some old buildings and mostly new ones with students who were excited for their sports and their friendship and dramas was now a small ghost town with no signs of life except for us security guards, of which only one of us was on campus at a time. Every day, I'd have to make 2 rounds around the entire campus, going through the old buildings and the new ones, checking every dark corner. For the old buildings, we have 8 student dorms, 1 adult dorm that showed signs of abandonment on the upper floors, overturned beds and such, an old set of condos turned into offices for upper staff, and old houses turned into the office space, a church, the boathouse, the library, and the old school building. For new buildings, there was the rec center, the sports center, the science building, and the arts building. When kids were on campus, it wasn't so bad, but when the campus was empty, the school didn't feel like school anymore. It felt dead, and like I was being watched. But not like I was being watched by students, but by something else, something that didn't want me there. The sun was still up, but on the setting side, which is why I let my guard down, as I mostly thought stuff like this happened at night. The science building and the old school building were connected, so I was crossing over from the newer building to the older one, and upon stepping foot inside, I heard something I hadn't heard the prior rounds, let alone the prior days. Footsteps. Running footsteps. They were above me, so I called out and made my way upstairs to see who it was, but there was no one there, and I didn't hear footsteps going up or down. I was about to brush it off when I heard another set run above me, this time on the 3rd floor. I booked it upstairs, calling out, and there was no one there. I checked the doors and lights to see if I was going crazy. The lights were off, the doors were locked. There was no way anyone could get inside, no way anyone could be running about. I got chills, and made a call then and there that I'd skip the old buildings and places like the library that made me really uncomfortable when the school was empty. I knew I would be getting into trouble for it later. It's not the first time I was skipping places on my route, but something felt so wrong I didn't feel like messing around with whatever that was. So my next stop was the Arts Center, the newest building. Something of note about the Arts Center is that there's a speaker system built onto the building that plays music throughout it whenever there are people on campus. The last few tours I went through there, it was quiet because no one was on campus. Today was different though. The moment I stepped inside, I could hear talking, indistinct chatter, as though 2 people were talking to each other somewhere inside the building. The building was locked though. I knew it because I locked it myself. but I still needed to go investigate anyway, no matter how much I hated myself for doing so. The lights inside were off, with light from the setting sun seeping in at right angles. Aside from the noise of talking, which I still couldn't make out, except for the fact that there were two voices, everything seemed normal. Then I made my way to the second floor, hoping that maybe I'd see who it was, despite them most likely ignoring me, going, "Hello, security," constantly. But the minute I reached the top of the stairs, the voices stopped, and there was a loud, heavy slam. I nearly screamed and ran. I honestly wanted to, but I knew I couldn't afford to, or else I'd be in deep trouble if someone was there. The area was very open, which allowed me to track the source of the sound easier. It was a large, heavy door that we left unlocked, due to it being easier to enter for our tours. It's the one room in the building that we keep unlocked, because all that's there is chairs and a table, and some students would often use the room for clubs or watching movies on the projector. I looked around the room, making sure no one was there. However, just before I turned and left, I saw something I'll never forget. A blue face looking at me in the reflection. It was shorter than me, so I knew it wasn't mine, and the look on its face looked like someone was struggling to breathe. That's when I decided, I'm not paid enough for this, and I ran. I ended the tour early, having done 3 buildings, and spent the rest of my shift in the guard shack watching the cameras for anything. I had hell to pay later when my boss came back to take over the shift, and he was pissed that I skirted most of my shift. But once I explained what had happened and why I didn't do the entire thing, his face changed. The man was an old, stubborn British arsehat, but he'd never made that face before or after. He told me 2 stories from the school's history. The first was his own experience of how when the school was closed for summer, he found himself cornered by a presence in one of the older buildings. He wanted to turn around, but according to him, it felt like something was standing behind him, and if he did turn around, he'd regret it. Eventually, the presence left, and he ended his tour, same mindset I had. The second story is about a pair of boys who were playing on the river by the boathouse. This was in the early 1900s or so, during the early days of the school. A pair of boys were playing on a raft in the river, when one fell off. I did some digging and records indicate the boy had drowned. The other boy tried to save his friend, but it was too late. I don't know if the boy's spirit is the blue face I saw, but I know I saw something. I heard something. I've brushed off most of my weird, unexplainable experiences in life as just my own imagination or coincidence, but I can't shake that day off. Something about the face burnt itself into my memory. All tours I did after had me paranoid and on edge. But thankfully I never experienced anything paranormal there again. It made me realize how much we've romanticized these experiences, and honestly it disturbs me just how romanticized they are, when it was one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. I used to work night shifts in group homes for adults with severe mental illness or developmental disabilities, and one house in particular changed the way I saw things. At first it was the small stuff, constant scratching from inside the walls. At all hours, I assumed it was squirrels. We were in a semi-wooded area after all, so that made sense. We set traps, called pest control, tried everything, but we never caught a thing. No droppings, no damage, just the scratching, always the scratching. But that's not what made me a believer. One night, I was sitting on the living room couch watching TV. All the residents were asleep. The house was dead silent except for the usual hum of old appliances and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then at around 3 a.m. the doorbell rang. Not a single jingle. Someone was leaning on it, pushing it over and over like they were in panic. I jumped up and ran to the front door. No one was there. Now here are 3 things you need to understand about the entryway to make sense of how bizarre this was. Number 1, the entry opened straight into the living room. I could see the entire thing from the couch. Number 2, the front door had a massive window covering over 2/3 of it. If someone was standing outside, I would have seen them. And 3. To get to the door, you had to walk down a narrow 20 to 30 foot corridor flanked on both sides by tall, solid 12-foot brick walls. There's no way to ring the bell and just duck out of sight. You'd have to sprint the full length of that corridor to round a corner and disappear. Thinking it might be one of our more mischievous residents, I did a full sweep, checked every room, every door, every bed. Everyone was asleep. As I quietly closed the last resident's door, the doorbell went off again. The same frantic ringing. I rushed back, same result, no one there. This time I was done playing games. I turned off all the lights except the glow of the TV and stood pressed beside the front door, just out of sight, waiting and listening. 20 minutes passed. Then the bell exploded to life again. I jumped out, flipped on the walkway lights and looked through the window. But there was nothing. I threw the door open, still nothing. No movement, no footsteps, nothing could be heard. Just the still, suffocating silence, and that brick corridor stretching out in both directions like a tunnel to nowhere. Then came the worst part. As I slowly began to close the door, hands still on the knob, the doorbell started up again. Except this time it didn't stop. It rang and rang and rang for 15 minutes straight, like it was laughing, like it was mocking me. And I stood there frozen, feeling this rising sense of dread crawl into my chest and settle behind my ribs. I slammed the door shut, locked it and bolted to the couch, flipping on every light I could find, and I didn't sleep that night. After that it got worse. The doorbell would only go off if I was alone, and, eerily enough, it seemed to know what I was thinking. If I got up for a smoke, the second the thought crossed my mind, ding ding ding, there it was again, like it was reminding me, "I'm here, don't you forget, I see you." Looking back, I was pretty convinced it was some sort of poltergeist. Group homes carry a lot of emotional residue. People come here with trauma most of the time, which we can't even begin to comprehend. It's like the energy doesn't go away. This house in particular had 2 residents I'll never forget. One had completely broken after witnessing his parents' murder right in front of him as a child. The other was a schizophrenic with multiple voices, at least 8 different, distinct ones that I could identify from conversation alone. Both of their rooms had things flying off shelves in the middle of the night. They'd shout at people who weren't there, yell at shadows, curse at the empty corners of the rooms, and for the longest time, I chalked it up to mental illness. But now, I'm not so sure. Years later, I worked at another facility in a different town, different population. One night while working the graveyard shift, I found out a resident had hanged themselves in a bathroom about a year earlier. That bathroom door, it refuses to stay open. It's company policy to keep it propped overnight, but every single night around 2 or 3 a.m., it would slam shut hard, like someone kicked it from the inside. Just one more locked room with something unfinished, I guess. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not saying I wasn't tired or overworked or imagining things. But there's something seriously wrong in that house. I used to work the night shift at a small gas station off the highway in the middle of nowhere. It's the type of place that has a single, humming, fluorescent sign out front, flickering like a dying firefly. And maybe 3 cars come between midnight and dawn. This was the dead of winter, sometime around January, and the snow never seemed to stop. The whole world outside looked washed out. I was maybe 21 at the time, working nights to pay for college, and most shifts were so boring. I'd grab a coffee from the machine, sit behind the counter, and do homework, or play my Nintendo. Sometimes a trucker would wander in for a coffee, or someone would stop on gas on their way to the next town. But for the most part, It was just me. That night started off like any other, and around 1:30 a.m., the bell above the door chimed, and an older man stepped inside. He looked like he'd been through hell. His jacket was thin, barely zipped, and his face was pale, in a bluish way that tells you someone's been out in the cold for way too long. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with these tired, bloodshot eyes, a little glazed, and shuffled down one of the aisles. I remember thinking maybe he was homeless, or maybe just down on his luck. He didn't grab anything, just looked at the shelves, wandered a bit, headed towards the back where the bathrooms were, and I figured he was either going to wash up or maybe do something sketchy in there. Honestly, I didn't really care. As long as he didn't start trouble, I wasn't about to get involved. He was there for a while. I'm talking a long while. About 30 minutes went by. It clicked that he still hadn't come out. Normally I would have ignored it, but something about the man's face stuck with me. He looked so empty, so I grabbed the spare bathroom key we kept behind the counter. I walked over and knocked. "Sir, you okay in there?" But he didn't reply. I called out again louder this time, but still nothing. That's when the hairs on my arm stood up. I told him I was unlocking the door just in case he was in there and didn't want to be startled. When I opened it, the first thing that hit me was the smell of wet clothes and something metallic like blood or maybe just cold metal. The old man was slumped over on the floor next to the sink, his back against the wall, head hanging down, his skin looking almost grey. I didn't have to touch him to know he was dead. I called 911, hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the digits on the phone. The paramedics came pretty quick considering how rural we were, and the cops followed not long after. They told me it looked like he'd frozen halfway to death before he came inside, probably tried using the restroom to warm up. The heat in there wasn't much, but I guess it was the last bit of warmth he could find. I went home when my boss finally came to relieve me around dawn. Didn't sleep much that day. Couldn't shake the image of him sitting there alone, just trying to get warm and dying. The next night, I came back to work as usual. The place felt different somehow. The bathroom had been cleaned and taped off for inspection, and all the paperwork was done. My manager said the guy didn't have any family nearby. He'd been walking along the highway after his car broke down a few miles away, and was just bad luck. Around the same time, around 1:30 in the morning, the bell over the door chimed again. An older man walked in. Now I know how it sounds, but the first thing I thought of was, holy crap, it's him. He wasn't identical, but he had the same kind of face, long, drawn with sunken cheeks, same greyish beard, heavily lidded eyes, and he was wearing clothes that were damn near the same colour. A faded denim shirt and tan work pants. Even his boots looked similar. I froze behind the counter, heart pounding. But this guy seemed more alert. He smiled at me and nodded, then grabbed a few snacks, a bag of chips, a chocolate bar, and bottled water. I tried to play it cool, scanned his stuff, and he said something like, "Can I leave this here for a minute? Just need to use the washroom." My stomach dropped. "Sure," I said, trying to sound normal, even though every instinct in my body screamed no. He set the items down and just headed back. I remembered watching him walk away thinking, maybe I was just being paranoid. Must just be a coincidence, right? 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30, and the same uneasy feeling crept up my spine. I finally grabbed the spare key again, called out that I was coming in and opened the door. But there was nothing. Not only that, the air still, strangely, smelt funny. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for my eyes to catch up with my brain, and then I checked the rest of the store. The counter was clear, no snacks, no bottled water, no anything. Out front, the parking lot was completely empty, with my card sitting under the street light, and snow softly falling around it. I even checked the security camera footage later that week when my boss was reviewing it for the police report. It showed the first old man coming in the night before, but the second one Nothing. No record of him entering or leaving. I'm not entirely sure what happened. I'm not saying it was a ghost or anything supernatural. Maybe I was just tired or hallucinated it. But the weirdest thing is every once in a while around that same time, the bathroom door creaks open on its own, just slightly, like someone testing the hinge. I've stopped checking. Whatever happened that night, I don't want to think about it. And if there's one pissed off ghost, I don't want it harming me. I work as a mill operator in a limestone plant. 2 nights ago, I was on the night shift, which basically means it's just me and one other guy out there in the dark. He handles the loadout outside, dumping the lime I make onto the ground. I stay inside, keeping the mill running. The building's old, steel beams and grated walkways stacked up 3 stories high, everything covered in a layer of pale dust that gets into your skin, your hair, and even your teeth. When the fan stops, you can hear the whole place breathe, metal ticking and setting in the heat. I started my shift like usual, doing maintenance. One of the first jobs of the night is oiling the mill. It's just part of the routine. I had the wrench in one hand, the oil can in the other. Working in that narrow maintenance area when I felt something hit me. At first, it was just a light sprinkle, like a handful of sand tossed from above. Then more of it, lime dust, raining down from the platform overhead. I stopped what I was doing and looked up annoyed, thinking maybe the other operator had come up without me noticing. And that's when I saw them, 2 work boots, just 2, and the lower half of a pair of legs, walking across the upper platform. I couldn't see the rest of the body. Everything above the knees just disappeared into the dim light. The footsteps were slow and heavy. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked, looked again, but the boots kept walking, heading towards the far end of the platform, and then they were just gone, and I was left standing there, staring up into an empty catwalk. I wiped the lime off my face and went outside to check with the other guy. He was still at the loadout, in the same place he'd been all night, driving the loader and dumping material. I'd asked if he'd been inside a few minutes ago and he swore he hadn't. He even joked that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't laugh. The next morning after I got off shift, I called my dad. He used to work in the same mill before he retired 18 years in the same building. Same machines, same night shift. So I told him what happened. And he got really quiet for a second, and then he said, almost casually, "Yeah, I've seen him too." That caught me off guard. I asked him what he meant and he said, "A ghost. Everyone around long enough knows about him. We call him Bish, short for Bishop. Don't worry, he's harmless." Later that day, I asked one of the old-timers about it, and he nodded like it was nothing. Said Bish was a worker who died in the mill decades ago, long before safety standards were what they are now. No one knows exactly how. It changed depending on who you asked. Some say he fell from one of the upper platforms, while others will insist that he got caught in the machinery. Either way, they'll claim he still walks those catwalks, checking on things, making sure the place is still running smoothly. I tried to laugh it off, but something about seeing those boots in motion without a body, without a sound, don't leave my head. Every time I walk under those platforms now, I always look up, half expecting to see him again. My dad told me not to worry. Bish doesn't hurt anyone. Maybe that's true. Maybe he's just still doing the rounds, like the rest of us. I used to work the overnight shift at a group home for adults with disabilities, and for some reason those nights were always unsettling. The houses were completely normal, nice even, but something about them after dark always scared me. Every so often, that feeling would hit me out of nowhere. I'd be sitting in the living room doing paperwork, and suddenly I'd get the sense that someone was standing just out of sight, right behind me. And almost every time, not even a minute later, one of the residents, non-verbal adults, would start moving around. There was one man who always unnerved me the most. He couldn't talk, only scream, these deep guttural sounds that didn't even sound human sometimes. He crawled everywhere, day and night, and his eyes had that milky, glassed-over look. Sometimes he'd come up to you, hold your hand gently, making these soft grunts like he was trying to comfort you. But other times he'd stop mid-crawl and stare at a corner of the room, or down the hallway, eyes wide, completely still. What freaked me out the most was that he'd do it right before I saw something move. Just a flicker at first, a darker patch against the wall that I'd mistake for a trick of the light. But then it would shift, like a person-sized shadow sliding along the floor. I could never catch it straight on. Every time I turned, it was gone. One night, I was feeling particularly scared in the house. I couldn't shake the feeling someone was in the basement. I was about to check when I heard the sound of slow, deliberate steps coming up the stairs. When I looked, one of the ladies was halfway up, creeping towards me, her eyes locked straight ahead. She was just staring past me into the kitchen. I asked her what she was doing, even though I knew she wouldn't answer. She didn't even look at me. She just turned her head slowly, following something invisible that moved down the hallway. I caught it for half a second, then a tall, human-shaped shadow, darker than the rest of the dark, gliding towards the back door before it vanished. I caught it for half a second, and then I saw it properly. A tall, human-shaped shadow, darker than the rest of the dark, gliding towards the back door before it vanished completely. Everything went silent. The woman stopped moving. The man who'd been screaming earlier went quiet, and the whole house felt lighter, like whatever dark presence had left. I tried to tell myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, bad lighting, or a mix of all three. But it always happened in the same way, and those residents knew whatever that thing was, it was in the room with us. I worked the graveyard shift alone at a technology data center for almost 3 years. The job was mostly routine, monitoring racks of servers, logging humidity and voltage levels, and checking machine output and patrolling the long, narrow corridors. It was a massive, sterile place, humming with the low bars and clicks of machines, bathed in harsh fluorescent light, and eerily silent, except for the beeps and mechanical whirs. I'd been there so long that the place felt more like a second home. I knew every hallway, every corner, and every panel that I was responsible for. The work was mind-numbingly repetitive, but I liked the solitude, or at least I thought I did. So one night about 3 years into the job, I was doing my usual patrol. The last shift change was around 2 a.m, so I had the place completely to myself. I walked the same route I'd taken 1,000 times before, checking the racks and monitoring machines. At exactly 3:30 a.m, I rounded a bend into one of the long hallways, a stretch I'd passed countless times without incident. There was this unprecedented heavy silence. No humming of servers, no blinking indicator lights, just an oppressive stillness. The air felt colder, but not in a way that was explained by the climate control. It was eerie. My skin prickled, and every hair on my arms and neck stood on end, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I had this unmistakable feeling, like someone or something was watching me. I slowly glanced behind me. Nothing. The hallway was barren. No doors, no shadows. And I tried to shake it off. But the feeling only grew worse, like a weight pressing on my chest. "Hello?" I said, half expecting an answer. But there was no reply. Suddenly a cold draft brushed past me on my right. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My instinct screamed at me that the presence was there again, just beyond my line of sight. I forced myself to turn towards the direction the cold air came from, telling myself I was being paranoid. But there was nothing, just an empty hallway. Frustrated and more than a little pissed off, I tried to regain control. "Come on, man," I said in my voice, firmer now. "It's time to go." Just then, I heard a faint click or pop sound somewhere in the hall, and I froze. A dark shape, like a shadow, materialized directly in front of me. It was darker than the dark itself, impossible to look at directly. It didn't linger. It darted down the corridor in a blur and vanished around the corner. My heart was hammering in my chest. I bolted back to my car and left the site immediately. The rest of the night I barely slept, every noise outside making me jump. I took a week of paid leave, went to see a therapist, and confided in a close co-worker who often worked the graveyard shifts on my days off. He'd been there 5 years, and said something similar had happened to him, twice in fact, and always in the same hallway, always preceded by strange, unexplainable noises. Before this I was a total skeptic, a firm non-believer in anything paranormal. But after that night, everything changed. Now I can't shake the feeling that something watches from the shadows waiting. Even years later, I still have nightmares about the hallway, and it always comes back to haunt me. And until now, the only person I ever told this story to was a coworker, because some things are just too weird to share with anyone else. But I'm sharing it with you all now, and I'd love to know what you think. Or am I just crazy? I work IT late shifts near my home, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I live alone in a quiet mountain town in northern Colorado. Last night around 1:15 a.m., I was heading out to my car to grab something I'd forgotten, my phone charger. The parking lot behind the building was completely empty. The gravel under my shoes was too loud, each step echoing like it didn't belong there, and that's when I noticed it. First, as a shift in the air. The hairs on my neck stood up, and everything around me seemed to hum for half a second, like an invisible wire had been plucked. The light above the dumpster flickered, and I caught sight of something at the far edge of the lot. It wasn't standing right. It was too long in the limbs, too narrow in the middle. It had the outline of something that tried to look human, but didn't understand how the pieces were supposed to fit together. When the light flickered again, it was closer, not walking or running, just suddenly there, like the space between us had folded wrong. I couldn't move, my mouth went dry, and the air smelled like metal. The gravel under its feet twitched, like something under the surface was alive. Then came this faint clicking sound, like claws tapping together or maybe teeth. The light steadied and it was gone. Not like it ran, more like it had been erased. No sound, no shadow, no trace, except that faint, static taste in the air. I didn't run to the car like I wanted to. My keys were in my pocket, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. After a few seconds, I forced myself to back away slowly and head towards the office instead. The fluorescent lights inside felt too bright, and about a half-hour later, I told the night guard what I'd seen. But he didn't laugh, just stared at me for a moment and then pulled up the security cameras. We watched the footage from that hour, and there it was, something moving at the edge of the lot, slipping between the shadows like smoke trying to keep shape. The frame glitched each time it got too close to a light. The guard leaned forward, squinting. That's not the first time it's shown up. It doesn't like to be seen. He looked at me, like he wished he hadn't said it. What did I see? And why? I work as an overnight security guard for a condominium complex. It has a healthy mix of young, old, and every age in between of people living in it. I work 12-hour shifts overnight, and usually around 12 to 1 a.m., one of the occupants of a unit called John comes downstairs and speaks with me about life, movies, his plans to move, his late wife, friendly banter between two bored people. Over the course of the time I worked there, John and I became friends, and I looked forward to him coming down to speak with me. Until one night. It was Sunday evening around 7, and I just got into work. My co-workers said to be ready to assist the morticians, and they're coming up to pick up a body, and I was like, oh Lord, who passed away? It turned out to be John. He had died in his sleep the night before, estimates around 3 a.m, an hour after we finished our usual late-night conversations, and this hit me really hard. I was the last person he ever spoke to. A few weeks pass, and nothing really changes, except that the 12-hour shifts now feel like they last forever, because I lost my friend, and the little break I had in the middle where we would chat. So everything else is normal until the other day. It was around 1 a.m, and I hear the elevator to the lobby ding. It makes a dinging noise when it reaches the lobby, and I look at the camera monitor and no one's in it. I chalk this up to me being overtired and hearing things, kind of like when you hear your phone ring even though it's on silent. The next hour, everything is quiet, so I decide to go make a cup of coffee. But as I start to stand up and walk to the kitchen, I receive an open request for the front door. To put it in perspective, the door is made of glass and directly next to me, so I usually notice people walking up to it, so they don't have to scan their key fobs. I look at the glass and see no one. I go outside and look around. Still no one. So I check the cameras and they don't pick up anything either. And I decide to log the scan record for entering the building. It turns out the open request was made by John. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, and I'm not easily scared, but this really upset me. I'm not sure if it was a system error or what, but it really made for a depressing rest of the night. But who knows? It could have just been John, giving me one final goodbye. Me and my general manager were closing up at work, about 10 minutes or so away from leaving for the night. He was in the back cleaning up the kitchen while I was in the front, when all of a sudden I feel an overwhelming sense of someone watching me. I instantly turned and looked at one of the doors to see an older man, and my stomach instantly dropped. Now we deal with the homeless all the time, so it's never a surprise seeing people just standing at our doors asking for food. But this man was just standing there, staring at me, and had absolutely no soul in his eyes whatsoever. Even though my instincts were telling me otherwise, I walk over to the door and ask him what he needs. As I got closer, I realized how tall the man is. I'm about 5'8", but he was easily 6'6", dressed in a white button-up. His eyes seemed to have no irises, just pupils, and the white of his eyes were bloodshot red. He explained a friend of his had dropped him off in the area, but he started to feel extremely sick and needed a ride home ASAP. I was 17 at the time, so I was definitely not about to drive a random homeless guy, especially not this one. He told me which road he lived off of, which I'd never heard, and begged me to drive him home. I went in and explained the situation to the general manager. When I mentioned the road, the general manager's eyes instantly lit up. My general manager also lived off that road. It was 40 minutes away. I told my manager he should go out and talk to the man, as I no longer felt comfortable. I walk behind my manager but stay inside and wait. As I look out the window, the man was now in a black button-up and had 3 or so Bibles out on the table with candles lit around it. When I first saw the guy, he had nothing with him that I noticed, and he set all of this up at most in about 5 minutes. My general manager walked in looking absolutely terrified and told me he had to take the guy home. I asked him why not just get him an Uber instead, but he insisted he had to be the one to take him home, even though he'd never met the man in his life. We both locked the doors and walked out to leave. As I walked away to my car, the man said, "May God be with you, Danny." A name I never told him. Neither did my manager. As I backed up, I could see him standing there in my rearview mirror. I'm not religious and I don't believe in ghosts. I don't know what this man was, but he was not human, and he kept me up for nights after this happened. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you have enjoyed tonight's night shift tales. If of course you did, you can let me know down below, and if there has been something that's happened to you and you would like to share it, please email it to themortismedia@gmail.com, or alternatively share it to my Reddit page. Info can be found in the description. If you'd like a birthday shout out or would like to support me even more than just watching the videos, of course, you can follow me over on Patreon for even more cool exclusive stuff. I would like to extend one final thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. For signing up, they get a bunch of cool perks, and again, if you'd like to find out more, down below you can find that out. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.